All right, thank you very much. It's my privilege to be here. So corruption is a cross-cutting issue in Ukraine. I have this little slogan from the Soviet Union times. I don't know if you can read it, which says, people or citizens don't give bribes. And if there are bribes, please talk to this judicial committee consisting of 3 people during Stalin times, and they will make sure that your complaint will be immediately considered, and a very severe punishment is awaiting for the person who has committed crime of corruption, and that probably was meant to be an execution. But anyway, so that's not new to Ukraine or other areas. So, before briefly talking about corruption, I want to actually suggest that Ukraine is a complex issue, more complex that it often is being portrayed in our analysis, as economists at least. I'm not sure about other fields. And I have 3 graphs just to suggest that. And here's one. This is the number of protests monthly from October 2009 to December 2013. And the events happened in December 2013, and we see some skyrocketing in October, actually, and November 2013, which was way before the actual, the end of November when Maidan happened, okay? So there is a clear trend of increasing protests, and it has been growing over the years, and it's not that, there's just one protest in Kyiv in December, which took place for whatever reason. So there's a systematic pattern, and that pattern needs to be understood. Now let's look at this pattern a little bit more in detail. So here we have a number of protests per 1 million of de facto population in regions, and center is the spikes. So that's, actually spikes are Kyiv. The green is the east, so the east has been not protesting as much per capita, but it has been protesting. And you observe, of course, that South has been protesting quite a bit. All right? So that's the entire Ukraine has been protesting, and the intensity of protests has been steadily increasing over years. Okay, so now let's look at the protest issues. What is it that people have been protesting about? So we can, and the numbers don't add up to 100% because protests sometimes about multiple issues, but roughly speaking, we can divide them into economic and socioeconomic issues, ideological, political, and civil rights issues. And we see that the number of socioeconomic issues is 60% in 2011, 43% in 2012, and 43% in 2013. And actually, if we look at 2013 before Maidan, we have 56% and 10% after. So at the same time, the political, ideological, and civic rights issues are increasing. So you could interpret it as there is transformation, there is frustration with socioeconomic issues, and that's not being addressed by the government or by the society, and it's being transformed into a political protest eventually. Okay, so that's one possible interpretation. Okay, so now I would like to talk about corruption very briefly. Corruption effort or anti-corruption effort, they're going simultaneously in Ukraine by multiple players. Some people are trying to corrupt the new system, some people are trying to anti-corrupt it. But there's some measured success for corruption fight, for anti-corruption. So first of all, there has been recent legislation, anti-corruption package, which in many ways is unprecedented. First of all, it's unprecedented because it has been passed in the first place, okay? Despite all the vested interests, despite all the resistance that you have been observing it at every stage, at every bureaucratic institution in Ukraine, okay? That has been passed, that itself is a good sign, that something is possible. Now, there is a question of whether it's been implemented, and the news perhaps is not as great as we would like it to be, but the legislation itself is quite nice. I have talked to civil activists recently. Last week I've been interviewing a bunch of them to just see what exactly is happening on the ground, and majority of them are quite optimistic and at least pleased with the anti-corruption package. Actually, Yanukovych has passed an anti-corruption package as well. And so every president in Ukraine passes an anti-corruption package when they come to power. But the activists say that this is much more specific and much less vague anti-corruption package, which actually might work to be implemented. Okay, there is strong public pressure forcing some political response. So currently there have been some successes, some resignations, or at least some responses from the presidential presidential administration of prime minister office, when these guys have been accused of corruption or harboring advisors who are maybe benefiting the family or something like that, trying to get the assets out of the country at the highest value possible. So there is some pressure on them from civil society. There is investigative journalists. These guys are not being, mostly prosecuted currently by the new government. But there is some response, but that response is very measured. A couple of people resign, but typically they resign not because it's truly a scandal. They resign because it's used by their political or vested interest opponents to sort of put pressure for them to resign. So you could imagine two oligarchic clans fighting for the control of the airport Borispol, and then there is a scandal about corruption of one of these guys, and then he has resigned. But that's not because the government says you guys have to resign, but because the other clan uses this as additional pressure. But something is working, okay? And then there are across-the-board promises of the political parties. Now, promises are promises, okay? And we have analyzed in Fox Ukraine, we have analyzed political party platforms. And there is a lot of heterogeneity on political sort of stand on positions about EU, on investigation of events on Maidan, and all kinds of things. So even pro-Western parties don't agree on sort of basic pro-EU stance, okay? But every party, including opposition bloc and others, talking about lustration, talking about anti-corruption measures. So the same rhetoric is everywhere. So there is at least a potential that that's a unifying issue for the parties if they pay some attention to the population. And there are local elections coming up, and so there is some feedback mechanism that might force them to actually respect their promises. Okay, moving on. The three other things I would like to mention: cleaner procurement. There is indeed some cleaner procurement, some reduction in budget and rent-seeking fraud. That's anecdotal evidence that's based on investigation or on discussions with people, but there is actually data, and economists should look into that data and check whether the prices on the procurement went down or not. And of course, the investigative journalists, Weekly Mirror, Kyiv Post, and Liga, and some Ukrpravda, some other outlets keep publishing information about the schemes, and some of them get cut down, some of them not. Okay, money laundering is diminished. That's a key, actually. The entire Ukraine is in business of money laundering, okay? The way it works, I participated in that when I was in university in Ukraine. I helped to launder money for the, chancellor or deputy, someone. Anyway, everyone does that. Okay, my friends do. Every volunteer battalions do that. Volunteers, I have a charity. I am involved with some charity. They do it. Everyone does it. So because the tax system is such that you can't really, if you pay all the taxes, you end up paying more than 100% sometimes. If you take into account fixed costs and such, and bribes you have to pay for permits. And so anyway, imagine you have to pay a bribe for whatever reason, okay? If you have to pay a bribe, it has to be unaccounted for, okay? Because you're not going to put it on the books. I paid a bribe to this official to get this permit. So the way it's done, there's the service provider companies. You pay for consulting or for something else, and these guys take 13% and give you cash, okay? So you pay for consulting, and that's not the bribing companies. You take that cash and give it to someone else. You give it to the judge. But there is this service. But the business didn't disappear, and there are conflicting reports we're hearing. Some people are saying that the business is still in place, it's just decentralized. Some lawyers are saying it's actually not possible to do that. And so, it's a sign that the government is trying to control that. So other people are saying that the prosecutor's office now is in business of reconsolidating it. So there are different, fights with who it will be cabinet of ministers, who is going to be in charge of this system, whether it continues to be decentralized. Some people are saying that percentage dropped from 13% to 9 to 8. That's how much so that's good news for the market, that there is less share on that. But indirect evidence is that tax compliance has increased. The payroll tax went up to 25% in the economic crisis. That suggests that some people are actually paying taxes because they are failing to find ways to launder money away. Okay, so that's an indirect. Excellent. People say sometimes you could get permits without bribes now. Okay, challenges. Maintaining healthy political competition might be, I don't know, it's an important issue. So I'm going to show you two graphs. What is this graph? I don't know what this graph is, but on the horizontal axis you have turnout of voters in this election. On the vertical axis you have a share of one party. There are some irregularities you can observe here. Those blue dots, which high turnover, high rates. Okay, but anyway, that's one of the parties. That's another party. That actually has a trend. Okay, I don't know what it means. You judge yourself. Okay, anyway, moving on. Media independence. Okay. Okay, so moving on, everything is on record here. So moving on, and I don't want to be sued, you know. And our blog, which is going to write about this, also we don't want to be sued. Okay, talking about being sued. Okay, media independence is important for fighting corruption. Okay, and whistleblower protection is important. So here's I don't know if it's a true document. I took it off the website of Zerkalo Nedelya and Ukr-Pravda. These are two leading media outlets in Ukraine. What is this? That's presumably, allegedly, and it's not true at all. Okay, this is a scan of internal document which was signed by the well, anyway. So it's a president's order, presumably. What we want to read is the last one of V. Yaremi. This is the last one. I'm going to read it in Ukrainian. It says, за результатами проведеної перевірки у випадку підтвердження наявності складу злочину за ознакою підриву обороноздатності держави притягнути до відповідальності автора статті щодо продажу зброї та військового майна, яка була викладена на сайті інтернет-видання «Дзеркало тижня». Okay, so the translation or the interpretation is the following. Weekly Mirror broke a story that the Ministry of Defense is selling to the volunteer battalions weapons. So they're actually charging volunteer battalions, okay? Now that is, you know, you hear stories like that. I've talked to people and they say that the Minister of Defense sometimes says that, you know, oh, you don't have, you know, heavy equipment, why don't you buy it? Okay, so there are stories like that. Anyway, they offer documentation and the Minister of Defense and the company which was selling, the intermediary, are now suing the company for defamation charges and reputational loss. Okay, great. So that, you know, but that's a discussion at the president's office that the money laundering and tax costs. I would like to conclude with this optimistic quote from George Orwell. The mistake you make, don't you see, is in thinking one can live in a corrupt society without being corrupt oneself. After all, what do you achieve by refusing to make money? You're trying to behave as though one could stand right outside our economic system, but one can't. Thank you very much.